I'm actually super amped up about this game, and it's for none of the reasons I would have expected it to be early in the season. The Browns, if you had told me we're going to start Joe Flacco 3 times, PJ Walker twice, DTR 3 times. This is Joe Flacco, right? This is Joe Flacco versus Case Keenum, and Joe Flacco is exciting as hell when he's showing his long ball arm strength, but terrifying when he's trying to thread the needle through tight windows. I think Browns fans would agree with me. Flacco's like being at a water park designed by a cokehead. You're just like, oh, this is awesome. I know there have been a lot of lawsuits, but we're gonna have a good time today. I just hope nobody gets decapitated. And they're in like that's where they are right now. Case Keenum too. Case Keenum doesn't quite have that same deep ball excitement, obviously, but he will cough it up. I mean, these are both guys that you bring in to be the game managers, the veterans, but both of them will actually turn the ball over quite a bit. The Texans have forced a lot of turnovers, have had interceptions as of late. The Browns offense has coughed the ball up a bunch this year, which is actually one more reason that it's impressive what they've been able to do. They're 32nd in turnovers on offense, and yet here they sit with 9 wins right now. The Flacco part's the biggest variable. The other part of that too is I think a lot of people look at it and think, oh, Flacco, statue, right? Stationary in the pocket. The Texans pass rush has been getting after mobile quarterbacks like Will Levis. But they should be able to feast on Joe Flacco. Be careful what you wish for in that because Flacco can actually move. Remember, Gary Kubiak had Joe Flacco back with the Ravens and got him moving outside of the pocket, getting him in on bootlegs. And Flacco's first touchdown drive last week was exactly that. He showed a lot of mobility, and he's able to throw on the run. He's got a connection with Amari Cooper. But it's all about just don't give up easy, deep shots on play action to Joe Flacco. If you do that, then you can force him into some bad decisions underneath. You just you can't get away with the play the Texans had last week where Treylon Burks was running free down the sideline and the dumb rookie instead tries to force it to DeAndre Hopkins because DeAndre had his hand up and Will Levis thought, oh, that must mean he's open, when in fact DeAndre was pointing at Treylon Burks, who was just wide ass open down the sideline. The play action is a big concern. And it's interesting because the Browns' run game has actually been putrid since Flacco took over. They're averaging 2.9 yards per attempt over these last 3 games after averaging 4.1 yards per attempt over the first 11 games. And I know what you're thinking, like, well, yeah, but they had Nick Chubb. Remember, Nick Chubb was only there for 2 games. So the combination of mostly Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt, Ford has been averaging 4.1 yards per carry. Kareem Hunt's having the worst year of his career. I don't think the Texans need to crowd the line of scrimmage to limit the run game. They've just got to be sure they take away the deep ball with Joe Flacco. The other guy to worry about is David Njoku. Njoku, he's got 3 touchdowns and 18 receptions in the 3 Joe Flacco starts. Most of that production and all of the touchdowns came in the last 2 games. So Flacco really hit a stride with David Njoku. The Texans have struggled and yielded some big games to tight ends early in the season. They've actually gotten their crap together to a large degree, and I feel a lot better about it now if the linebackers can keep up what they started last week and be as sharp as they were. And you go back and they weren't crowding the run. They weren't crowding the line of scrimmage focused solely in on Derrick Henry, trying to keep him to the 0.56 yards per carry that they did. That's 0.56, not 5.6. They held him to 0.56 yards per carry. They're freaking awesome. But they were doing it from depth. The defensive line just kicked ass up front. The linebackers were playing their keys. Like, it was as sharp and disciplined as I saw out of the linebackers all year. They have to keep that up because Njoku's had instances where he was wide open versus the Jaguars. He had a wide open shot. As far as the Browns defense, number 1 overall in passing yardage. They're number 2 overall in passing yards per play. They are yards per attempt, most humans would call it. I think that the big thing to know about them is that people are going to tell you, well, they've had some breakdowns in the last few weeks. I don't look at those letdowns as like evidence that it's not actually a good defense. I look at it as evidence that a defense can only carry a team so far for so long. They've managed to do it up to this point. They have three very, very good cornerbacks. So they have depth. They can play nickel and dime without a huge letdown. And that's where the strength of their defense is, in the passing defense. Their rush defense is not as good. It's not bad, but they're about average. And that's where I think some of the discussion about Myles Garrett comes into play. The Browns move Myles Garrett around a lot, and that can be a real headache, especially if they move him over, say, the Texans left guard or the Texans center. That can be a problem. Where the opportunity is there is, they do that to keep. And the Texans did this with J.J. Watt. You take your best pass rusher and you try to match him up against the worst pass protector, because then you've got more opportunities instead of just having a stalemate with Myles Garrett lined up over Laramie Tunsil every single down and just kind of in some ways wasting the production of your best pass rusher. You move them around. That's what they did with J.J. Watt. It worked really, really well. The one thing I've always wondered about that, and I think it helps a lot having Case Keenum directing traffic, is that when you take your best defensive lineman and you move them around and put them over your weakest offensive lineman in the run game, all of a sudden you've said, oh, okay, so Laramie Tunsil, our best offensive lineman, has I don't want to say an inferior defensive lineman, but not one as good as Myles Garrett there. And it can help you in the run game. And you've got other guys playing out of position sometimes, depending on the personnel. If Myles Garrett is moving around all over the place, a lot of times when you've got a defensive end down there playing nose tackle, it can hurt you versus the run. So that's where Case, who got the Texans into a lot of good situations in the run game last week, he can be an asset, especially there. And it's something they can game plan for. So I'm nervous about it in the pass game. Don't get me wrong, but I think there's an opportunity in the run game. Jonathan Grenard, as of right now, is amongst the sack leaders in the NFL. He's having a very, very productive year, and he's also really good against the run. I think the thing that gets lost a little bit is that part of his production comes with a disciplined pass rush and really good and disciplined play by everybody else on the defensive line. There were times early this season where John Grenard might have a really good rush going, but the quarterback was able to leak out the other side of the pocket or up through the middle. And that hasn't happened as much in the last several weeks. So you're starting to see not just John Grenard, but Malik Collins and everybody else kind of get in on everything. And he's facing a Browns offense that, as of the end of last week, was playing 4 backup offensive linemen. They're going to get their center, Ethan Pocic, back. That helps. Joe Bitonio went out in the first quarter of last week's game, and it was obvious, like right from the onset, that they missed Joe Bitonio. They just could not mash in the run game the same way they can when Joe Bitonio's in there. If he plays and they've got Pocic and they've got I'm blanking on the right guard there, then that's a solid core. They might be able to run the ball a little bit better. They've still got like Jerron Christian starting at left tackle, former Texans player Jerron Christian, who these guys have some experience against. So that is very much a strength for the Texans versus this Browns offensive line. And again, Joe Flacco only scares me if the Texans make mental errors, and they've been much more opportunistic in the secondary. The Texans have been over the last several weeks. Forcing Joe Flacco into bad decisions is key in this game, and I think they'll do a good job of it. As far as the running backs for the Browns, Jerome Ford makes me a bit nervous, just because if you have flashback to the Jets game where the Texans may have played their sloppiest game all season, what did you see? Breece Hall, the running back, be an issue as a receiver. And that's something the Texans at times have struggled with. Again, if the linebackers play as sharp as they did last week, I don't worry about it. But Jerome Ford's got 39 catches so far this season. He's not like lethal as a receiver, but between him and Njoku, they can attack that second level pretty well. And he's been adequate as a runner. He's averaging 4.1 yards per carry. They just haven't been as good over these last 3 weeks. Kareem Hunt is 3.1 yards per carry on the season. The team, the Browns, in these last 3 weeks since Flacco took over, the team is 2.9 yards per carry.